Hello everyone. Today we are going to learn about fourth ventricle. Here you can see a diagram of fourth ventricle. Fourth ventricle, it is the cavity of the hindbrain. It is a tent-shaped space, right? That you can see, the tent-shaped space that is situated between the pons and the medulla in front and cerebellum behind. So you can say that it lies dorsal to the pons and upper part of the medulla oblongata and ventral to the cerebellum. It has lateral boundaries, floor, roof and a cavity. Right? First, let us understand the lateral boundaries. On each side, the fourth ventricle you can see on inferolateral aspect, we can see it is bounded by the gracile tubercle, the cunate fasciculus and the cunate tubercle and the inferior cerebellar peduncles. And superolaterally we see here there are superior cerebellar peduncles, right? So as it is a tent shaped, right, so boundaries are inferolateral and superolateral, right, as we have seen in the popliteal fossa. So in the superolateral it is only superior cerebellar peduncles that is forming the boundary, and inferolaterally gracile tubercle, cunate tubercle and cunate fasciculus and the inferior cerebellar peduncles, right? So that will form the boundaries. Next we will take is the very important part of the fourth ventricle, that is the floor of the fourth ventricle. Floor of the fourth ventricle is also called as the rhomboid fossa because it is rhomboid in shape. The floor is formed by the posterior surface of the lower or the closed part of the pons and the posterior surface of the open part of the medulla, right? So we know that the floor lies, half of the floor lies in the pons and half in the medulla, right? We have seen this with the pons and the medulla also. Deep to the floor, there is a layer of the grey matter containing various cranial nerve nuclei, right? That forms the very vital centers. The floor is lined by ependyma. Now, if we see the floor, it is divisible into three parts. You can see a upper triangular part, right? This one, that is formed by the dorsal surface of the pons. Then the lower triangular part that is formed by the dorsal surface of the medulla, and the intermediate part, this area that you see, right, that is at the junction of the pons and the medulla. The intermediate part is prolonged laterally over the inferior cerebellar peduncle as the floor of the lateral recess, right here. This part is marked by transversely running fibers, which are the fibers of the stria medullaris, right? You can see the fibers that are shown here. These are the fibers of the stria medullaris, and these fibers represent the fibers from the arcuate nucleus to the opposite cerebellum. Next we see the common features of the floor, right? Now here in the floor you see there is a dorsal median sulcus, right? Here you can clearly see a dorsal median sulcus that is dividing the floor into symmetrical right and left halves. On either side of the midline there is a median eminence that you see here, right? One on each side of the median sulcus there is a median eminence, and this eminence, if you observe carefully, it is wider above and narrow below. It presents facial colliculus just opposite and medial to a depression called as the superior fovea, right? Here you can see a facial colliculus is there, and just lateral to this facial colliculus here there is a pit that is present, right? That is a fovea, that is called as the superior fovea. We'll see one another diagram which is more clear. In this diagram you can see here, this is the median eminence. This elevated part that you see is the facial colliculus, and just next to the facial colliculus laterally you find a pit is present, right? A very small pit is shown, that is called as the superior fovea. Coming back to the original diagram, deep to the colliculus is the genu of the facial nerve formed by this nerve looping around the abducens nucleus, right? We have seen this in the pons, right? In the transverse section of the pons. Hypoglossal triangle occupies the lower narrow part of the eminence, and beneath this triangle lies the hypoglossal nuclei, right? This area that forms the hypoglossal trigon or hypoglossal triangle you can say, and below this triangle is present hypoglossal nucleus. Next, here in the floor you can see a sulcus, right? This median eminence, right? Laterally it is limited by a sulcus that is called as the sulcus limitans, and in the uppermost part, that is the pontine part, the sulcus limitans, it overlies a area that is bluish in colored, right? You can observe this. That bluish colored area is called as the locus ceruleus, right? This area is called as the locus ceruleus. This color is due to the presence of the pigmented neurons which constitute substantia ferruginea. The upper part of the sulcus limitans is marked by a depression, the superior fovea, which lies just lateral to the facial colliculus, right? That we have seen in the other diagram also. In the medullary part of the floor, here in the medullary part, sulcus limitans is marked by a depression called as the inferior fovea, right? As you have a superior fovea in the pontine area, similarly in the medullary area, again there is a depression here that is called as the inferior fovea. Descending from the fovea, there is a sulcus that runs obliquely towards the midline, right? This is the sulcus that is running obliquely towards the midline, and this sulcus divides the median eminence into two triangles. One is the hypoglossal triangle medially, and this is the vagal triangle. This is the vagal triangle laterally. Okay. Below the hypoglossal triangle, hypoglossal nuclei is present, and below the vagal triangle, vagal nucleus is present. Between the vagal triangle above here and the gracile tubercle, right? So, between this vagal triangle and gracile tubercle, again you can see a very thin area is present. This area is called as the area postrema, right? This area is called as area postrema, which functions as chemoreceptor. Okay, so that is about the sulcus limitans. Next, what you can see in the floor is vestibular area, right? This too, that is the vestibular area. It lies lateral to the fovea, right? Lateral to the superior and the inferior fovea. The area that is present in the floor is called as the vestibular area, which overlies the vestibular nuclei, and this area is partly in the pons and partly in the medulla. Okay, so that is all about the floor of the fourth ventricle. Okay, in the next video we will see about the roof, the recesses, and the communications and the applied anatomy of the fourth ventricle. Bye.